Lipford. I'm the president of Bath Historical Society, and I would like to introduce our honored speaker for this morning. Earl Shuttleworth is a Maine native, a Portland native. He's received degrees from Colby College, Boston University, honorary degrees from Bowdoin again, and Maine College of Art. He has been he was appointed by Governor Curtis to serve on the first board of the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, for which he became architectural historian in 1973 and director in 1976, and continued as director until retirement in 2016. He has had many elected and appointed positions, including President of Maine Historical Society, President of the New England Chapter Society of Architectural Historians, Chair of the State House and Capitol Park Commission, Chair of the Capital Planning Commission, and Chair of the Blaine House Commission. He served on the Maine Lighthouse Selection Committee and the State Facilities Master Plan Commission. He has lectured and written extensively on Maine history and architecture. He has been Maine's 6th state historian since 2004, so 20 years as state historian. Please join me in welcoming Earl Shuttleworth.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Keep switching glasses here. It's really a pleasure to be with you here this morning. First, just a couple thoughts. One is, if you have any questions, would you please hold them until the question and answer period is finished. Not finished, but begins. And then secondly, so it'll be right after the lecture, any questions. And then secondly, if you have a cell phone, if you could please make sure that it's turned off. It really is very nice to be here. As some of you may know, I had hoped to do this lecture in the spring, but things intervened, and now here I am to give it in the fall on what seems to be the first day of winter out there with 20-mile-an-hour winds. Also, before I start, a disclaimer. I am not a maritime historian. I leave that to wonderfully equipped people like Nathan and also my good friend Bill Bunting. My interest here today is more from an art historical standpoint, in that I've always been fascinated with art, architecture, and photography, particularly as it relates to 19th century Maine. And so for a long time, I've been fascinated with the whole issue of ship carvings, particularly figureheads, and how they interact with the whole tradition of creative sculpture, carving, whatever, in Maine in the 19th century. First, to say that adorning ships with carvings and with elaborate painting, of course, goes back into ancient times, and we have ample evidence of this. In America, the tradition really seems to begin right after the Revolution, and figureheads begin to appear in the late 18th century on vessels here in Maine and elsewhere, and the tradition continues until probably around the 1880s or so, and then begins to phase out. There also, of course, is an alternative to the figurehead, which was less costly for the shipbuilders and the people who are financing the vessels, and that is the billet head, and we will see some of those, and that's the very elaborate scroll that would be on the bow of the vessel as opposed to the figurehead. We're looking here in this introductory slide at two photographs from the 1870s taken by the Bath photographer Higgins. At the left is the bark the figurehead for the bark Belle of Oregon, built here in Bath in 1876. And carved by Charles Sampson. We'll hear much about Sampson. And then on the right is the bark Western Bell figurehead, also of 1876, also by Sampson. These images come from stereo views that were taken by J.C. Higgins, who was the prominent local Bath photographer of the post-Civil War period. And they both were taken at Sampson's shop here in Bath. And what they represent really is not only wonderful early photographic records of these extraordinary figureheads, but also the fact that, as we'll see as we go on, that there was a great deal of interest in the citizens of Bath, as reported by the newspapers of the time, from the 1850s until the 1880s, this height of the figurehead carving period in Bath, and particularly the work of Sampson, of people wanting to visit his shop and see these figureheads before they went on to the vessels, before they were installed on the ships. And so time and again, there will be these detailed newspaper articles from the 1850s through around 1880 talking about the citizens of Bath congregating at his shop to see the latest figurehead. The art of the carver really reached a remarkable height on the Maine coast in the mid-19th century, and particularly, of course, emanating around Bath, which was the great shipbuilding hub of Maine. We're looking here at one of the gems of the Maine Maritime Museum collection in relation to photography. Early daguerreotypes from the 1840s and 50s are extremely rare, particularly outdoor ones that show something other than portraits. And here we have a daguerreotype of the sternboard of the ship Tempest. And the Tempest was launched on November 1st, 1849 at the Penelon Brothers Yard in Brunswick for the Patterns, who were Bath owners. And of course this shows Neptune, the god of the sea, with his 4 horses. Beautiful scroll work. This is the stern, the rear of the vessel. And this is perhaps attributed to William Southworth, who, his primary career was in in the Newcastle Damascotta area, he also worked in Bath in the late 19th century. And at this point, if he had been the carver of this great sternboard, he would actually have been starting out his career in Portland. But we'll get into more of Southworth and why we think this is connected with him. But this is just a marvelous example. Of course, it doesn't survive, but it's a marvelous example of the level of sophistication and creativity that went into these carvings for Bath-related ships. Nathaniel Windsor moved from Bath to Bath from Duxbury, Massachusetts in 1820. He's the earliest known carver that we can actually attribute a work to. This shows the brig Clarissa Ann, which was launched in Bath in 1824, and it bore a figurehead which we believe was carved by Nathaniel Windsor. And here is the figurehead, again, one of the great artifacts of the Maine Maritime Museum collection. The earliest known figurehead relating to Bath, 1824, and a very nice close-up here of the ship painting showing the figurehead on the vessel, on the bow of the vessel. I should add that the Clarissa Ann was built here in Bath by Levi Houghton. Now we turn to the next Bath carver, and this is Freeman H. Morse that we see here on the left. Very interesting individual. First native-born carver, born in Bath, February 14th, 1807, educated in local schools, and he might very well have been trained by Nathaniel Winsor. He was primarily active as a carver in the 1840s and 50s, and we see here one of the few vessels that we know he was involved in. This is the vessel, the Rappahannock, which was built by the Sewells in 1841, and the carving on the figurehead is that of a Native American. It is said of Freeman Morse, quote, "He was very successful carrying on the business for quite a number of years as a carver, and in his time won not a little fame by the skill and cunning exercised in his art." But we also remember him for his political career. He was 3 terms in the Maine House of Representatives, 3 terms in the U.S. Congress, and then in 1861, Abraham Lincoln appointed him as U.S. Consul General in London, and he continued to serve under Presidents Andrew Johnson and Ulysses Grant until 1870. And in this experience of being in London for that decade of the 1860s, he decided to become a British citizen, and he never came back, died in England in 1891. Now we turn to our next carver. We don't know a great deal about Cyrus A. Ingalls. He was active from about 1852 until 1866. We know that he carved billet heads, those scrolls, for 4 Sewell ships between 1852 and 1862. And he worked with Charles A.L. Sampson in 1866 to carve the figurehead for the ship Kate Davenport, which we see here both in the close-up at the left, the full figurehead, the full standing lady, and then the vessel at the right. Now we come to really our primary figure of the morning, Charles A.L. Sampson. Born in Boston in 1824, his father was a prominent printer. Sampson came to Bath about 1850 with another carver, J.B. McLean, who is believed to have worked initially in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Sampson established his own ship carving business in 1852, and he was active from 1852 until his death in 1881, carving at least 26 figureheads for ships built in Bath, Brunswick, Phippsburg, and Richmond. And this was really the primary focus of my research on the Bath ship carvers, tracking down what Sampson did. There were some very good clues in Baker's Great Maritime History of Bath, both in the book itself and also in Baker's research files at the Maine Maritime Museum, but no one had actually tracked down the period newspaper articles one by one that would fully document what Sampson did. And this was my task, which I did over quite a number of days at different times a few years ago in the Bath History Room here. And I can only say that the facilities that you have here for local history are just outstanding, as well as the staff who staffs that room in their ability to help researchers. And so out of that experience, I actually found 26 period articles describing the work of Sampson, and I will be quoting from some of those in a few minutes. But we have to also, as with our friend Freeman Morse, we also have to consider that there was another aspect to Sampson's life. First, let me just say, the 26 figureheads fall into three categories: ship owners or their family members. And it's really incredible to think these sculptures were made, almost life-size sculptures of actual people who were involved in the vessel in one way or another. Idealized young women, and we've seen those already. And then public figures, such as Joshua Chamberlain. So now we get to why Mr. Sampson is standing there in his Civil War uniform. He served as an officer in the 3rd Maine Infantry Regiment, which was primarily from Bath, in 1861 and 1862, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel. He was discharged for illness in 1862, but his wife, Sarah, who had accompanied him at the beginning of the war as a nurse for the 3rd Maine Infantry, once she nursed him back to health here in Bath, she went back to the battlefront and continued her nursing work through the duration of the war. Sampson died in 1881, and his practice was taken over by William Southworth, who moved from Bath, from the Damascus and Newcastle area to Bath. And many of you know that his wife, Sarah, continued on, living until 1907. Not long after her husband's death in 1881, she moved to Washington, D.C. to work in the pension office, where she assisted thousands of veterans from around the country to obtain their Civil War pensions. And she actually lived most of the rest of her life in Washington. And because of her remarkable service as a nurse during the Civil War and her philanthropic work afterwards, she founded the Orphans Home here in Bath, and also helped to found a girls' school in Hollowell. She, unlike her husband, who was buried here in the local cemetery in Bath, she was buried in the nurses section, the Civil War nurses section of Arlington National Cemetery. So there are a handful of these great figureheads that survive. Of course, you know, for the most part, when a vessel either was lost at sea or no longer was seaworthy and was broken up in the late 19th or early 20th century, the beautiful carvings often went with it. But in a few cases, they were saved. Here is the bark Forest Bell figurehead of 1877 by Sampson. The Forest Bell was built in Bath by Goss and Sawyer, and it ended its life in the late 19th century out on the West Coast. And so miraculously, this figurehead that had started its life in Bath in 1877, of a very fashionable woman of the period, it was rescued when the ship was broken up and ended up in the Oregon Historical Society, where it's on permanent view on this grand staircase. So there she is, the Forest Bell from Bath to Portland, Oregon. Here is another of the really major idealized feminine figures that Sampson created. This is the figurehead for the bark Western Bell of 1876, also built by Goss and Sawyer. This one is owned by the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem. And at the left, we see a 1930s rendering of the figurehead of the Western Bell, which was part of the WPA project, the Index of American Design. This is a beautiful watercolor that's now part of the collection of the of the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And as you can see, at that point, she was shown without her extended hand. We'll get into that in a moment. On the right, you see one of the Higgins photographs. We'd already seen this, where the figurehead of the Western Belle is shown outside his shop. There's the doorway to his shop shows in the lower part, but there's been a drape to give her a background. Now, the story of the extended hand is very interesting. In both the Western Belle and also the counterpart, which is the Belle of Oregon, in both cases, there were these detachable arms where when the vessel was in port, the arm would be placed on it so that it had the full force of its design. But when it went out to sea, the arm was taken off. And in both cases, because these were grain-carrying vessels, the ladies are carrying in their hand holding sheaves of wheat. Okay, so let me just quote a bit about the Western Belle from one of the period Bath newspapers. A lady, full-sized, actually we can move on to another image of her. This is a J.C. Higgins photograph, profile photograph taken of the figurehead, again, just before it goes on the vessel. A lady, full life-size, attired in fashionable dress of the present day, pulled-back skirts, 5-button gloves, arm extending, holding a sheath of wheat. The only cause for regret that so charming a creature will be doomed for the rest of her existence to breast the stormy wave and be subject to the billowy buffeting of old Neptune. They really know how to write in those days. And then get prepared for this. Well, a Michelangelo could see an imprisoned angel in a block of marble by the wayside in the city of Florence. So our Samson saw the beautiful creature constituting his beau ideal in the shapeless log lying before him. Victorian pose. Oh, could we shut the door? At 76, my hearing is too good. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Belle of Oregon. Pardon me. Wait a minute. Let me get here. Yes, this is the Belle of Oregon. Very good. Got to keep my figurehead straight here. Okay, so the Belle of Oregon is, in a sense, the sister ship and the sister figurehead of the Western Belle that we just saw. Again, this vessel was built in 1876 by Goss and Sawyer. And in this case, the figurehead that we'll see in a few moments is actually owned by the Mariners Museum in Newport News. At the left, we're seeing the Belle of Oregon under construction, and at the right, what we've already seen in the introductory slide, the J.C. Higgins stereo view of 1876 of the Belle of Oregon just after she was completed by Sampson outside his shop. And here is another wonderful, much clearer photograph showing the Belle of Oregon outside the Sampson shop. And then, like the figurehead previously, this figurehead was also, because it had survived, it was also entered into the Index of American Design in the 30s with this I will just quote here again from a period newspaper article. This is the Belle of Oregon. "Well, of course, the figure adds nothing to the strength and durability of the vessel. We may compliment the person who conceived of such a figure for a vessel calculated for the lowly grain trade." Okay. Now we're turning to the ship Belle of Bath, built a year later in 1877, also by Goss and Sawyer. Apparently they really favored, they were a real patron of Sampson. And again, to the left, we see an Index of American Design rendering. And in this case, she's not on a grain vessel, so she doesn't have her arm out with her sheath of wheat. And we have to the right the period photograph before she goes on the vessel by Higgins. And we have the period description: "A young lady of noble form, dressed in the latest of style, with well-trimmed skirts. This young lady also abounds in jewelry, ornamented as she is with necklace, earrings, bracelets, fan, and bouquet. They add not a little to her personal attractiveness." Whoops. And then we have, wait a minute, what happened here?
You went ahead twice.
There we go. Good, very good. So now we have the ship Florence, also built by Goss and Sawyer, built in 1877, and wonderful photograph. Whoops. Yeah, okay. Wonderful photograph which shows the figurehead on the vessel, and we have description from the newspapers. "Colonel Sampson has another of those exquisite, beautiful figureheads for which he is so famous. She is to be named the Florence, for the captain's daughter, Florence Kelly." Whoop. We have a little problem here. Nathan, you want to come up for a minute? I've got something that's popped up on the screen that's holding things back. There it is. I've gotten rid of it. I think we're okay. There we are. Very good.
Gosh, he solved his tech problem.
Yes. Well, this is the hazards of modern technology. Now we're looking at the figurehead for the steam whaling bark Mary and Helen of 1879 by Sampson. Another one of these wonderful Higgins photographs taken just before the figurehead goes on the vessel. And the period description: the Mary and Helen is named after the principal owner's little girls, a figure of Mary being at the bow and Helen at the stern. And sadly, they didn't photograph the Helen at the stern, by Mr. A.C.A.L. Sampson. Okay, now we move on to William Southworth. William Southworth was born in Duxbury, Massachusetts in 1826. Started carving when he was very young, moved to Portland in 1849, and we know in 1849 that he carved the sternboard for the Cordelia built in Bath. And we also think that he, in that same year, he did the stern carving that we saw at the outset of the lecture in the daguerreotype for the Tempest. There is a 1909 reference in an article about Southworth at the time of his death that he owned a daguerreotype of a sternboard. And so, you know, maybe put two and two together, we aren't sure. But here we're looking once more at that great sternboard for the Tempest. Here's an article at the time of his death claiming that he carved 500 figureheads. That might just be a slight exaggeration, I'm not sure. And then we have a photograph of him as well. Between 1852 and 1881, he worked primarily in Newcastle, then from 1881, at the time of Sampson's death, he then assumed Sampson's practice, moves to Bath that year to take over Sampson's business, and he dies in Bath in 1909. We know of one figurehead that he did. This is really at the very end of the period when figureheads are being created for Bath area vessels. There's a newspaper reference that Southworth carved the figurehead for the T.H. Allen built in Richmond for T.J. Southard. Whoops. Oh dear. Okay. Now to Emery Jones. Emery Jones was born in Freeport in 1827 and died there in 1908. So he is primarily associated with Freeport and Brunswick, but he did work very closely with Southworth during Southworth's period in Bath. The first example of his work that we'll be taking a look at is this beautiful eagle carving with the American flags that was done at the outset of the Civil War in 1861 and is owned by the Maine Historical Society. And then, very fortunately, we have this major figurehead that is owned by the Maine Maritime Museum here in Bath. This is the ship Samuel Schofield II, built in 1883 at Brunswick, the work of Emery Jones. And we see the watercolor that's in the National Gallery of Art, in the Index of American Design collection at the left, and then the actual figurehead at the right. And as the story goes, I believe, and Nathan would know this much better than I, that this figurehead was initially owned institutionally by Historic New England, and then negotiations were made to return it to Bath for the Maritime Museum. And it's just a wonderful example of this art, and particularly of an example of an actual person involved with the vessel, a life-sized replica of them, so to speak, a statue, a carving of them, as opposed to the idealized ladies. And then at the Mariners Museum in Newport News is another work by Emery Jones, and this is from the George R. Schofield of 1885, and we have on the left a photograph of the figurehead as it is displayed in Newport News, and then at the right, a wonderful photograph of Emery Jones's studio, carving shop, presumably in Freeport, showing the carving just at the time of its completion. And then we get to Edbury Hatch, and here he is, actually sitting in a hotel in Boston, because toward the end of his career, he actually kind of managed an old hotel in Boston, but that's well before his carving career comes well before. Edbury Hatch was born in 1849 in Newcastle, and he is the longest lived of these carvers. He lives until 1935. He was apprenticed in Newcastle to William Southworth between 1866 and 1870. Then he worked in 1876 with Sampson on the Western Bell figurehead, also with Sampson in 1877 on the Bell of Bath, and in 1879 he worked with Sampson on the Mary and Helen carvings as well. He is primarily remembered, though, more for his architectural carvings and carved signs, many of which were done for the Newcastle Damariscotta area. And my good friend Chris Havey has brought in an actual architectural carving by Edbury Hatch. It's there below the screen. And this was a piece that was rescued by
Houston?
Houston Dodge.
Yes.
Right. Some of you will recognize Houston Dodge. We'll go into that a little bit later. But in any case, that's an example. And it's really wonderful to have today an actual example before us of one of these carvers to just show the level of skill. And then another of the great treasures of the Maine Maritime Museum, the workbench and tools of Edbury Hatch, and before that, William Southworth. These were rescued by, why am I blocking his name? Houston Dodge, forgive me, by Houston Dodge. Of course, Houston was born and grew up in Damariscotta, and at an early age, he appreciated so many of the historical artifacts of his area, and he rescued these, and then toward the very end of his life, through the artful negotiations of Charles Burden, they were able to come to the Maine Maritime Museum. And then we've just added at the end of this talk a couple more images that display figureheads by Sampson. This is a wonderful painting, again, owned by the Maine Maritime Museum, which shows the Emily St. Pierre, and she's at the right. And she is, this is during the Civil War period. She was originally launched in the William Rogers Yard here in Bath in 1854. You can just see the figurehead, which is of a young woman, showing Emily St. Pierre. But by the time that this painting was done, she was a Southern blockade runner during the Civil War, and she has a British flag, and you can see that she's being captured by a USS vessel. And here's some close-ups. Again, the Emily St. Pierre, where you can see the figurehead, and then the close-up of the figurehead itself. And finally, this is really at the very end of Sampson's work. This is the head and stern carvings for the steam whaling bark Belvedere, 1880, and of course he dies very early in 1881. Again, built and launched by Goss and Sawyer, along with Packard. And it really shows that by 1880, the figurehead tradition was already beginning to wane. The fact that this major vessel would have beautiful carvings on both the stern and the bow, but there is no figurehead present. There's basically a very elaborate bow carving, and then in addition to that, you see the eagle on the stern. So that ends our brief look at Bath carvers and their work. By no means is the story complete. There's so much more to be learned that we don't know, but at least I've shared with you this morning an overview of the knowledge that we have. And I'm very open to any questions you might have.